You can sit in the safety of your own home, removed from direct danger, while your biology operates in neurological hypervigilance and spiking cortisol. Persistent inflation, the sudden acceleration of artificial intelligence, and shifting social contracts have created a deluge of systemic stressors that define the mid-2020s. This era exacts a psychological toll beyond material loss. Millions live in chronic alarm, scanning for threats that remain invisible and ambiguous. This pervasive anxiety reflects a structural biological response to a world that defies prediction. To understand why uncertainty feels like a threat, we have to look at the brain as a prediction machine. It does not passively react to the environment, it anticipates it. The brain's core imperative is allostasis, managing energy resources. It generates internal models to forecast future needs. Predictable environments validate these models, resulting in physiological calm. But during rapid shifts, the environment stops matching the internal model, creating continuous prediction errors. Losing the ability to forecast the future deprives the brain of its primary energy management tool. It effectively loses its grip on the steering wheel. Consequently, the organism interprets macroeconomic or geopolitical uncertainty as a literal physical threat to survival. Regulation is defined as the body's capacity to move fluidly between states of activation and rest. It requires a return to a baseline of safety once a stressor has passed. Within the window of tolerance model, chronic threat exposure forces the system into two states of dysregulation. First, sympathetic activation, a fight or flight state manifesting as anxiety and hypervigilance. Second, dorsal vagal shutdown. When threats feel inescapable, the system collapses into a numb, dissociated freeze. Persistent stress can even cause neuroplastic alterations in the periaqueductal gray, a midbrain hub that governs our threat response. When this hub fails to reset, it leaves the autonomic nervous system in permanent escape mode. Relentless exposure to fear-based media acts as an ambient trigger, preventing the parasympathetic nervous system from ever initiating recovery. This internal dysregulation frequently drives self-destructive financial behaviors, most notably the rise of doom spending. Purchasing provides a brief dopaminergic hit that temporarily suppresses anxiety. It's a biological workaround bypassing the prefrontal cortex, the brain's center for long-term logic. But the relief evaporates quickly, leaving accumulated debt that exacerbates the very anxiety that triggered the purchase. Similarly, the collapse response of the nervous system mirrors the job insecurity driven by artificial intelligence. When workers face a transformed labor market where their utility feels threatened, the resulting cognitive dissonance erodes their sense of identity. This ambient anxiety eventually fractures our relationships. Chronic economic strain activates the same brain regions responsible for processing physical pain, making social connection and empathy nearly impossible to maintain. These self-destructive patterns emerge because the human biology is attempting to regulate itself in an environment that offers no stability. The psychological catalyst for this crisis is an intolerance of uncertainty. This trait drives the distress and cognitive paralysis seen when people face ambiguous or novel situations. The traditional response is attempting to dominate the external world to soothe internal fear. But this rigid pursuit of control shatters under systemic pressure. We can shift this orientation through a sense of coherence, focusing on the origins of health and adaptability rather than disease. A high sense of coherence acts as a buffer. It allows an individual to perceive challenges as comprehensible, manageable, and, most importantly, meaningful enough to invest in. This requires redefining uncertainty tolerance. Rather than just enduring the unknown, we cultivate the cognitive flexibility to adapt within it. If our brains struggle to predict the world, we must look at the nature of the thing we are trying to forecast. Reality functions as an unfolding field of probabilities rather than a fixed, rigid structure. In this paradigm, consciousness is the field, and the brain acts as the receiver. It tunes into these probabilities, translating them into a localized experience. The egoic drive to possess and freeze reality into a predictable form creates the very suffering we seek to avoid. This path of domination is a misunderstanding of how existence actually functions. The external world often acts as a reflection of our collective internal state. When a populace is driven by fear and sympathetic arousal, the social and economic structures inevitably mirror that frequency of threat. True power lies in the realization that while the external fractal is subject to change and decay, the core awareness remains intact. Anchoring the self amidst global instability requires a transition from a reactive posture of control to a proactive state of coherence. We can interrupt the neurobiological trigger of anxiety by defining a strict circle of control. Practices like rigorous expense tracking engage the prefrontal cortex, forcing the brain to deal with present facts rather than catastrophic future projections. This responsibility also rests on organizational leaders. During periods of severe resource constraint, employee well-being becomes a core determinant of performance. Leaders can act as a stabilizing node in the network by fostering team psychological safety. By rewarding candor and allowing for productive conflict, they regulate the collective nervous system of the organization, preventing the paralysis caused by fear. A leader's role in an unstable world is to serve as an anchor, allowing the group to adapt with creativity rather than collapsing into self-preservation. The dissolution of predictable economic and institutional systems is a painful evolutionary threshold. It demands that we locate a foundation that does not rely on external performance. Liberation from existential anxiety comes through the acceptance of impermanence. We learn to operate as the observer who watches the waves of thought and the storms of the economy rise and fall. You are not the storm of your thoughts. You are the sky behind them. The dreamer is separate from the dream. Security rests on the capacity to remain coherent when everything collapses. It is the realization that while the world changes, the core awareness watching it remains untouched.